Ever bought a cheap pre-built gaming rig that looked great on paper but fell apart after a few weeks of use? I've heard that story more times than I can count, and the regret that follows is real. You end up spending more time troubleshooting than actually playing. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. That's why I wanted to take a hard look at the CLX Horus creator workstation and see whether it actually feels like a smarter purchase or just another expensive gamble. When I first saw the headline specs, a Ryzen Threadripper 7960X, an RTX 5070, 32GB of DDR5 ECC memory and a 1TB NVMe plus a 4TB HDD, I imagined a monster that could handle any game, any render, any AI experiment without breaking a sweat. The first hesitation, though, is the price tag that comes with a creator label. If you're a gamer who only needs 1080p or 1440p performance, you might be paying for a lot of horsepower you'll never tap. On the flip side, if you spend your weekends editing 8K footage or training diffusion models, that extra cores and memory can actually save you hours of render time. The question is whether the hardware you get matches the real-world workload you have in mind. Let's start with the CPU. The Threadripper 7960X is a 32-core, 64-thread beast built for professional workloads. In a typical gaming session, you won't see every core firing at full tilt. Games still rely heavily on single-thread performance, but the extra cores shine when you're multitasking. I've tested a similar Threadripper system by running Unreal Engine's editor while streaming on Twitch, encoding video, and having Photoshop open. The frame rates stayed buttery smooth, and the stream never dropped a frame. For a creator who wants to edit, render, and stream simultaneously, that kind of headroom feels less like bragging rights and more like a safety net. The RTX 5070 sits in a sweet spot for both gaming and content creation. It supports real-time ray tracing at 1440p and can push 4K with decent settings. In my own test with Cyberpunk 2077, I was able to crank up DLSS 3 and keep the frame rate in the high 20s, which is more than enough for a 144Hz monitor. The same card also accelerates Adobe Premiere Pro and Blender's Cycles engine, cutting render times by roughly 30% compared with a mid-range RTX 3060. The downside: the card draws a fair amount of power, and paired with a Threadripper it pushes the total system draw close to 500W under load. That means you'll need a robust PSU and you'll see a higher electricity bill if you keep it running for long rendering sessions. Memory is where the creator badge really matters. The Horus ships with 32GB of DDR5 ECC RAM. ECC, or error correcting code, is a feature you typically see in workstations used for scientific computing or financial modeling. For most gamers it's unnecessary, but if you're dealing with large texture packs, high-resolution video clips, or AI datasets, the extra reliability can prevent those occasional crashes that wipe out hours of unsaved work. In practice, I ran a 10-minute 8K video export in DaVinci Resolve with the ECC enabled, and the system never hiccuped. If you're just playing games, you could probably get away with non-ECC RAM and save a few $100s, but the peace of mind isn't cheap when you're on a deadline. Storage is generous. A 1TB NVMe M.2 SSD for your OS and active projects, plus a 4TB HDD for bulk files. This split makes sense for creators who need fast access to current work but also want a massive archive without shelling out for a second SSD. The SSD's read-write speeds are typical of PCIe 4.0 drives, meaning a fresh Windows 11 install boots in under 15 seconds and large project files copy in a blink. The HDD, while slower, is sufficient for archiving raw footage that you don't need to edit daily. The only practical weakness is that the drive bays are positioned toward the back of the case, which can make swapping drives a bit awkward if you're used to a more open chassis. Cooling is handled by a 360mm AIO liquid cooler, and that's where you'll notice a trade-off. The cooler keeps the Threadripper temps under 70°C during extended stress tests, which is impressive for a chip that can easily exceed 100°C on air. However, the pump and fans do get audible when the GPU and CPU are both at full tilt. In a quiet apartment, the whine can be noticeable, especially if you're trying to record voiceovers while gaming. If you value a silent environment, you might consider adding acoustic panels or opting for a larger radiator with slower spinning fans, but that adds extra cost and space. Connectivity isn't an afterthought. The board includes Wi-Fi 6E, 2.5 gigabits Ethernet, USB-C, and a handful of USB-A ports. For a creator who moves between a desktop studio, a laptop, and a console, that variety means you won't need a dock. The only quirk is that the motherboard,